Well, this is Cabin Conversations, a regular podcast here at Woodlands Church. I'm Dave Bondison here with co-host Whitney Swenson. Hi, Whitney.
It's a regular podcast.
This is a regular.
It's no longer weekly.
Yeah, no, we made that change a little bit ago. Just the reality of life that it doesn't happen. Last week we weren't able to record because of sickness in the home and stuff like that, and that's just life, and we're not gonna be frustrated about it.
Amen.
Or, you know, I don't know. I think this is true for a lot of people. We probably just don't have the capacity to make it happen every week.
Every single week. We can get streaks in there, though.
Yeah, 4 in a row, 5 in a row. We should keep track of those streaks.
And celebrate it every time we get a new streak, like bring a piece of cake or something.
a new highlight. So something like that. So, hey, our guest this week is none other than Barry Moody. Hey, Barry, how you doing?
Good.
It is good to see you.
Thank you for having me back.
Yeah. Our lives over the last few years were punctuated often with regular conversation with you, and that gets to happen now, but we have to be a little bit more intentional about it because you've, how do we say, spread your wings and flew out of the nest, Barry. So you went and found yourself a real person job.
A real person job.
So
it was definitely a real person job here.
It was.
Yeah.
But
so you're no longer a staff
different.
at Woodlands.
Correct.
That's a change as of what, Christmas time?
November 27th.
Yeah, right before Thanksgiving.
Okay, Thanksgiving time. It's been that long.
Before or after? Right after?
I've missed
it
you
was
so
a Monday
much.
after Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Clearly.
I truly have. But yeah, why don't you describe really just briefly what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I am working as a project manager and draftsman for Heartland Custom Homes.
So fun.
Yeah. It's different. I'm having a blast doing it.
Yeah.
Definitely a different change of pace. But yeah, Andrew has picked up the pieces here and is doing phenomenally.
Andrew Messick.
Andrew Messick, yeah. So kudos to him.
He's now the director of buildings and grounds, or somewhere around there, and he's taking care of
trying to get titles
facility.
right here is hard.
Yeah, well, we don't even know, so we're just
facility director, I believe, is what his title is.
Is that what
there
it is?
There we go. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
Which is super cool because he's another guy who came up through Woodlands. I mean, his family has been here for as long as I can remember, certainly, and that goes back to when I was here as a kid. And so to continue to see that just that reinvestment in stuff is
it's
really,
cool to
really
see
neat.
people that have grown up here in the church now like giving their talents here as employees and seeing them thrive. So
a generational love for this place, and yet at the same time I feel like it doesn't lock us in, like we're not stuck in something like this is what we've always done and so we can't change anything, but there's definitely flexibility and things like that. So
it was a cool process. It was very emotional to leave here. It was also cool to see how God had a plan, and he brought Andrew in, and Andrew's a good fit for the team.
Yeah. You know, I just, go ahead.
There's just, he has a plan for his church, yes, but for you too.
Right.
Like there's a very cool story that's being written in your life.
Absolutely.
With what you did here, how you grew here, and then how now you get to go into Heartland. And
I was here for 9.5 years.
Yeah.
9 years.
Yeah. That's a chunk of time.
It was cool to reflect back where we were at as family 9 years ago. Emmett was 4 months old, 6 months old. Looking back who I was 9 years ago before being here and how I had grown as an individual, as a Christian being here, it was cool.
God uses experiences. They're not end points. They're not, we often think about, especially career changes as end points. We're looking for where we're going, but God often is using them to shape and mold us. And that's a continual process. Like that doesn't end until we go to be with him in eternity. And so, it'd be easy to, I think in some contexts, it'd be easy to say, oh, those are 9 years that, it's not where I landed forever, so it was a waste. And obviously that's not even close to true. So, which is good. Yeah, it's just kind of hopefully an end of a season of just a lot of transition on that tail end. So
hopefully.
There's been a lot of stuff going on. So, hey, we have been asking our guests as we've been getting started, and so we'll lay it to you really quickly. When do you consume content, and how do you consume content? This is kind of our season 3 second guest question, because you've been on this season already, and we asked you about your morning routines. But
and the reason he's saying content is because I think you can listen to an audiobook and call it that it's
Oh,
read
absolutely.
it.
Absolutely.
And Dave disagrees with that, saying it's been
based
read.
on the definition of the
I get
word
read
read.
to all the time.
Listen and read are two different things. So I'm not in any way devaluing the process of that. I'm just saying the semantical
I'm not saying
definition of
you
the
were.
word.
I know. I just disagree.
So
That it can when I mark it in my brain, I've read that.
Yeah.
What else? You say I've consumed that?
I don't, but like
Anyway,
I listened to it.
Yeah,
That's what I would say. So when I'm saying consumed, I'm like read or listened
anyway,
to.
we're mostly talking
Yeah.
about books, a little bit about podcasts and other things too.
Yeah,
I can retain things better if I hear it than
See?
if I sit and read it.
that's interesting. Okay.
So if I read it, my mind is often thinking of other things, but I'm reading the words, but thinking about what I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm listening to something, I can do something, but retain what I'm listening, but still, like a lot of times while I'm at work, I'll be drawing at home, but listening to a podcast or listening to a how-to on, sharpen what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I'm able to do that while drawing, while clicking my mouse. And
So that's so interesting because I found for me, I guess, I wonder if it's the type of content too. Because so often I'm like, I read circularly, kind of. It's like I read a line and then that goes back to the line above it and then the line next to it. And I'm just kind of circling around because I'm refreshing myself on what I'm reading as I'm processing. And I cannot do that listening.
Do you do that for all this? Like, that's a leadership book in my mind. That's what I would do.
Well, yeah,
But
I'm
if I'm
thinking
reading a
theology right now
story-
in particular.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, a narrative story would be totally different. But in that, honestly, narrative story, I'm skipping every other line, kind of sort of thing. I am. I'm skipping longer descriptive paragraphs. I'm trying to move the plot along. I'm like, I don't care about this description of this mountain. I get it. It's a mountain. It's big. That's cool.
You're so funny.
Okay.
I remember a little bit from the last time that we did this. You were talking about Blinkist.
Yeah.
And I've since developed an opinion. I'm not going to use it.
Have you looked at it?
No.
Oh.
But I have no desire to move things along anymore. Like I've spent too much of my life thinking I need to catch up. Like I'm behind. And I'm done. I don't want to like I am where I am. I'm entrusting that God has had my seasons of life where he's had them. And I don't need to run forward. I don't need to skip things. I just want to be in what I am doing right now. And so I'm not, maybe I'll change my mind. I haven't looked at it, but I just thought about like, I don't need to skip ahead on even the description of a mountain. I just want to linger on that. And I think part of that is like, this is a ramble and I'm not sure if it's useful. So I'm going to try to make it short. But thinking about like going out to the mountains with my family, we're driving 70 miles an hour and then all of a sudden they pop over the horizon. You're like, oh, cool. Thinking about the Tetons in particular. And then you drive forever through nothing, but there's mountains like coming up. And you reflect on people that have like drawn those hundreds of years ago that were on an expedition and they can draw them from memory because they're moving really slow and they've seen the same site for a really long time. And there's something really like kind of cool about that where you pick up different detail that I miss driving 70 miles an hour. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I hear it in the light of Justin's conversation about spiritual disciplines that we had. Just the good spiritual edification of waiting and patience and being in the moment. I hear all of those things.
And you don't want it.
No, it's not that I don't want it. It's that I think that it's really easy to talk about the gain without the cost.
Sure.
Because those people, yes, maybe they had a picture of a mountain memorized that they could paint because they waited. But the cost was months.
Yeah.
Months of just traveling.
Yeah.
And their goal was getting somewhere.
Yeah.
And there were gains along the way, but at what cost? And so that's the question when it comes to like a leadership book, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's stuff to the gain, I think, is the content. It's not the journey.
Sure.
And so at what cost do I have to slow down and process?
And I would flip that and say, I think there was probably even the leaders on that expedition gained things in the months of leading people experientially that we don't when we just consume content. So there's a difference about consuming content and then putting it to work or experientially gaining wisdom and content. Anyway, this is random.
So just to respond to that point, we're not going to let this be. This isn't going to be like one of those things that comes up every podcast. But there's a difference between going on a journey with a master author like Tolkien and saying, I'm going to experience this and I'm going to rest into the experience.
Yeah. Do you skip his descriptions of
Yeah,
mountains?
probably, just because I want to move the plot along. But I could more readily accept the argument that you shouldn't in that case than saying the journey with this random, Adam Grant. He's a great writer. He's got great leadership content, but like, I'm not going on that journey for his content. I'm going on it for his the truth that are tucked in there.
Then you just read the prologue.
Yeah. And then I'm Blinkisting it.
Yeah.
Then that's what that is.
Okay.
So anyway.
Is it hard for you to talk with a microphone in your face because you talk with your hands a lot and you're doing this? And
I think this is a new thing. I don't think I've done this much gesticulation up to this point. So, yeah. All right.
So your question was, when
for
do
you.
I take in content?
Yes.
And then Barry's just patiently sat here while we argued about something. Okay. Well, hi.
Oh, Barry, we need you in our
It's
life
all
still.
throughout the day.
Yeah.
Honestly. I have an intentional time in the mornings when I wake up. I wake up and I have coffee. My daughter loves coffee. So she
Kate?
thinks, oh, yes.
She loves like black coffee? Or does
With
she?
creamer.
Oh, with
Creamer.
creamer.
Yeah.
Okay. Dump some sugar
She
in
likes
that.
cream with coffee.
Yes.
Yeah.
Understandable. It's very yummy.
So my time in the morning is I wake up 5:30ish
Mhm.
and I'll have a half hour of quiet time by myself. Kate listens for when the coffee dinger beeps that, hey, coffee's done. And it's usually about 6 o'clock and she gets up.
That's so
and we'll have
funny.
coffee together. And it's a sweet
so
time.
funny.
Your
It's a sweet
quiet
moment.
time happens before coffee.
Yes.
I mean,
Because if
coffee's
she hears
brewing.
she's an early riser, but she also knows that she needs to stay in bed because mom and dad want quiet time.
Yeah.
But when she hears the beep, she thinks I can get up and I let her. So yes, my quiet time from 5:30 to 6 is usually having the Bible read to me, but I'm also looking at it. I want to be intentional with that. So I'm on my phone usually with YouVersion, having YouVersion
Who reads
read
it
to
to
me.
you.
Yes, but I'm sitting there reading along with it.
Yep.
And then we'll have coffee together. And then usually during my day, I'm listening to whether it's a biblical-based podcast or biblical-based book while I'm working. A lot of times I'll listen to content that I enjoy.
Sure.
During the dishes, after the kids go to bed, I'm going to do the dishes. I put a podcast in. So it's all throughout the day. I try not to be staring at my screen, bringing in content, but listening.
Is a lot of that in headphones?
The earbud, yeah.
Earbuds?
Yeah.
Okay. And do you constantly have those on you? Like I'm thinking about the dishes.
Try not to.
So,
I mean, they're constantly on me.
Yeah, but
in
not
my pocket, but not in my ear.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes
Especially
sense.
when the kids are on, I don't want them to think like, oh, I can't talk to dad. He has an earbud in.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a thing. I cannot fit podcasts into my life for whatever reason. It's just, and we've talked about this before. So
I will often, I don't sleep well. I don't fall asleep well. So I'll often fall asleep with the earbud in, listening to a mundane podcast because it will put me to sleep.
Okay.
the boring ones. You're listening to cabin conversations at night. That's
Found our repeat listener.
That's how we serve you.
That's
We
how
help put
we
you to
get
sleep.
200 listens.
That's how your
is
views go way
just-
up. Yep.
Yay. Oh, good. So
Yeah.
cool. Well, that's great. Yeah. In the constant refrain is however you consume content, right? Like in a good way, in a positive way. I think that there's an easy argument to be made that we live in an era of over content consumption, but we also live in an era where we have access to unbelievable thought, unbelievable entertainment, which isn't a bad thing. It's part of the gift of God. Unbelievable content. And
I think
so
we're in a
take advantage.
time of life, an era of we're receiving content one way or another, and we need to be intentional about how we're receiving
Given
content.
wisdom.
Very much so.
Yep.
I will say this on here, but 2 weeks ago after New Year's, I deleted my Facebook account. I was like, oftentimes I'd go on there for something, and all of a sudden I'm looking at reels, and I'm just like, an hour's gone by, and I'm like, what have I done?
Yeah. Yep.
And I was like, I don't use it for really anything that is crucial.
Mm-hmm.
So,
You were a marketplace fiend, weren't you? Like you got a lot of stuff off of
but again, it was a waste of time.
So,
Mhm.
okay. All right.
So it was the area in my life I'm like, I could.
Cannot do that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Intentionality. And there's so much unintentionality in how we can use our time.
Yeah.
Especially with social media and those dumb phones.
I made my phone a dumb phone. And I'm learning all the ways that I can get around it right now.
Right. I know. That's the thing, right?
But all the things I don't need. Like you said, we were talking about weather before we actually hit record. And I picked up my phone and looked at the weather. I'm like, oh yeah, don't have it on here. It doesn't really matter. I'm gonna be okay without knowing what the weather's gonna be like today. But yeah, interesting things.
For a long time, I've had not had the Facebook app on my phone because the web version of Facebook didn't have Reels, and that wouldn't waste my time.
Interesting.
But they just added it in the last month or two, and so
Sure.
I find myself more often like falling into it, and I'm like, this is just stupid.
Mm-hmm.
So and it's just guarding heart, guarding time, guarding intention, and it's not that those things are wrong as long as the time is used intentionally.
Right.
I've often thought, hey, I'm going to spend 30 minutes, looking at funny videos or something like that.
Yeah.
That's a choice. I can make that choice.
Mm-hmm.
But what I don't want is, oops, I just spent an hour looking at
Exactly.
stupid videos.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So there's far too much important stuff out there
Mm-hmm.
to get to. So speaking of important stuff, let's chat about, in particular, last week's sermon,
One-hit
Philemon.
wonders.
Yeah, one hit wonders. We're going through these.
I appreciated John's little moves as he was coming up on stage.
Yeah,
Was he dancing?
He was. This is a little bit. This is a little bit.
All right, he's jamming in there. So see if we can moonwalk up there.
Everyone's hoping that he does. Let's be honest.
that he
Okay.
dances. So,
Yes.
well, this next week is mine.
Jude.
So
Are you going to dance on the way
I'm
Come
out?
not
on.
going to dance
Come
up on the way.
Can
no.
you turn around and do the moonwalk or something?
I can moonwalk. I can moonwalk quite. No, I can't moonwalk quite well. I can pretend
Prove
I
it.
can moonwalk. Oh man. No, but I don't know if you've read Jude. It is not like a groovy book. It's
Yeah,
kind of
I'm
like
not sure where you're going.
bring the fire sort of situation.
There's a
So
lot of fun stuff you can go with, and there's a lot of comparison going on there, bud.
there's a lot.
A lot of lists.
So
A lot of let's see what's
So we'll talk about that next week.
Next
so
week.
if we make it to 2. So depending
Make it our
depending
streak
on
is
how it
2.
goes. Yep. So we're talking in particular about Philemon, but the last 2 weeks have both been about relationships too. So when we were in 2nd John, it was about asking questions.
Third
and
John.
3rd John and
Mhm.
going deep with one another. And I had a listener reach out who missed us the week that we were off.
Oh.
Because she was interested in talking about boundaries in relationships.
Mm.
It's so important for us to have these people in our lives who are asking us questions, but how do we guard ourselves from a relationship that just asks too much or takes too much? How do we gauge that? How do we adjust when that happens? So I'll just throw that out to you two fountains of wisdom. How do we make sure that we're not in a position where a relationship is asking or taking too much from us? Does that question make sense?
Kind of.
How do we develop boundaries, healthy boundaries in our relationships, especially if they're maybe a little unbalanced?
Mhm.
A relationship is taking more perhaps than it's giving. Is that a thing?
Mhm.
Is that a proper way to think through things?
Yeah.
'Cause-
I also think, I just like tread wisely there in discernment, because if it feels like it's imbalanced, like you have no idea when the tables are going to turn and you're going to be imbalanced in the other way. Like if you feel like somebody's needing more from you, you have no idea what's coming down the road where that might turn.
Yeah.
I think, Barry, what wisdom do you have? Help.
I think, especially if we're married, our spouses will tell us,
Mhm.
hey, like even in good situations,
Mhm.
right? I mean, I can spend
Mhm.
20 hours a week helping Dave because he needs it,
I do.
or Colton because he needs it,
Yeah, no.
or others. But also like just being very conscious of our spouse saying, hey, there's needs other places as well.
Mhm.
Like it's great to be able to help friends.
Mhm.
So yeah, just being conscious of other relationships around you,
Mhm.
be able to set priorities, set boundaries of, okay, I have 5-8 hours this week that I can do something for others
Mhm.
without being like, I feel like that sounds selfish of me, but also it's not, because there's other needs that I have to be able to say yes to.
Yeah.
But if I overcommit to something else, someone else, and I can't. Is that helpful?
Yeah. So I'm thinking about pig farming. The
Yeah.
little I know,
Yeah.
the majority that I know about pig farming, I pick up from conversations
With
around
me.
you, when you're, especially when you're talking to other people. And one of the things that's so important is the pen.
Yeah.
is delineating an area. That's creating boundaries for the pigs. And you create those delineations because you're prioritizing your space. I have a limited amount of space. The pigs get this space, and I'm going to create boundaries that keep them in that space. The strength of those boundaries depend on the strength of the pigs, the size of the pigs, right? And so I think in the same way, in our lives, it starts with prioritizing. What do we need this time for? That's what you were talking about. And then creating appropriate boundaries to keep intentional space in intentional places. So you're saying...
I feel like there's like boundaries is a broad word though, because it could be time, it could be emotions, it could be like...
Yes.
It could be so much more than just, hey, we need to set boundaries that...
5 to 8 hours.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And even I think in as you were talking, Barry, I'm thinking, yeah, we're limited people. We're not the infinite God. And when we push against the infinite and say, I can solve everybody's problems, we take on this messianic nature, and that's not us. We're not God.
Right.
So we have, so I think like the precursor to boundaries is knowing your limits, is knowing you're limited. And not, I think then it's easy to feel guilt or shame that I can't help everybody all the time, or that it feels sassy or whatever. But I think in the reverse end of that, when you say I can help everybody and I don't have limits, you're pushing against God's very good boundaries that He put on us already. Like we are limited people, right? We don't. So that doesn't get to the point of the question, though. I think there's like, how do you do that? Like, I think understanding we have limits and understanding it's okay to set boundaries is one thing, but how do you do that in a relationship? I think then you started with your spouse might help you say, what about this relationship that might be taking too much emotion or thought or time?
Can I jump to knowing your limits really quickly too?
Yeah.
Because it's also knowing your responsibility.
Yeah.
So it's not just like, I can't do this, but also I don't need to put this on me. And I think there's a lot of times in relationships that we're putting weights on ourselves that we should be putting on God. And maybe it's like, man, it would be more valuable for me to spend 30 minutes in prayer for you than it would be for me to spend 30 minutes with you right now, because it's God's responsibility or power that's going to change and shift in this situation. So go back. You said then your spouse might help you. What's the process then for that?
Of deciding what are good boundaries. Oof.
And in the case of not a spouse, it could be also healthy relationships that you're processing. But none of that happens if you're not processing things too.
Right.
If you're not sharing your schedule, if you're not sharing your tiredness, your the places that are taking emotional weight, if you're not being honest about that, and that's not complaining. No, that's not gossiping. It could be. I mean, it could drift into that. But if you guard your heart against that, there's a health. So
I think if you have someone that you can process that with and be like, hey, I want to set boundaries, but I have no idea how. Even be able to, like you said, what are your responsibilities? Like, what are your things that we have to do as a father? I have to have time. I have to be able to prioritize. I need emotional capacity. I need the time capacity for my family. So be able to even to set that up, that you can process through your day. Once it's set up in your mind, structured in your mind, you can process throughout the day. Like when you have an ask, like, no, I can't do it today. Or, actually, I know what's happening this evening or whatever. I have the capacity to do that today.
It's so along those lines, Barry, if you and I are in a conversation and you're like, how do I set boundaries? It's a lot easier for me to give you advice in that than maybe it is for you to come up with those things, because I don't carry the weight of actually following through on those boundaries. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's kind of more of a thought process for me than it is an action process for you. You're like, oh my goodness, how am I going to have that conversation? I'm like, just have it. Which just reminds me how important processing with other people is, giving them the freedom to speak into your life, because they can see areas that you can't see. They can give you direction that you need to hear, but aren't going to land on yourself. Hey, look, community.
hey, look, community.
It's like that should be the theme of cabin conversations.
Yeah.
Get with people.
Yeah. And there are certain people that are definitely going to be helpful in that, and then some that aren't, right?
Yeah.
So, like, this is a shout out to Lauren, came on staff and just has noticed certain areas where you're like, maybe you don't need to spend so much time on that WIT. Like that's taking a lot of time. How can I help? She'll say, or how do we like rein that in? Or there was one scenario, it was like Thursday afternoons at Woodlands, like Friday's pretty much shut down for people wise. So if you need to get anything done with people, Fridays or Thursdays kind of the day to do it. And I had something to get done. And sweet David Hansen walks into my office just to be like, hey, haven't seen you today. And I'm like, I can't. I love you. Hello. But I need to, like, I had a timer set of, I had 13 minutes left on my timer and I wanted to get this thing done. And I felt terrible. I am a people pleaser and I'm learning all of the different spaces and ways that I people please that are maybe not helpful. But Lauren was like, you needed to do that. You never do that. Well done. And I was like, oh, thank you. I felt really bad about saying
affirming boundaries.
Affirming that boundary of that you set this thing and you were doing it and you stuck to it.
Mhm.
And I felt terrible in doing that. So I think there's like, thank God for Lauren. Thank God for David Hansen being able to be like, oh, she's working on something and being okay with there too. Cause that could have been a very different scenario.
Was your door shut?
No. My door was not shut. But also doors don't really matter sometimes here. It's like it's shut and I look through your door and I'm like, Dave. Often.
That's an area where we can lean in
Yes.
and press in. I walked past a number of people's doors that were shut today and didn't knock.
Yeah.
So
well
even
done.
one was Colton, and we all know Colton's not actually doing anything when his door is shut. So just kidding, Colton. We love you. Oh my word.
Yeah.
So that's good. That's good. That's good processing. So let's talk about Philemon. And
Can we go back to that real quick?
Yeah.
yes.
How do we process? How do we set up boundaries with unhealthy relationships? Can we go there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Hey, that's a segue into Philemon.
I know,
Unhealthy relationships.
exactly.
That's great.
Because in my mind, when you read that question, I was trying to decipher. Like, I'm assuming that she's referring to, or she. I don't know if it's a she or he wrote this question. I'm assuming that she is referring to like, how do we set up boundaries with relationships
That are sucking from you.
That yes,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Intentionality is one of the biggest things. I mean, you just talked about the timer that you had going, and not that David Hansen's an unhealthy relationship in any way, shape, or form. But when you're like, I have this space that I've given here, then that's something. One of the things that I think then becomes really important in going into, so you're like, okay, I've processed this person is someone I'm in relationship with. It's important for me to be in a relationship with them, but I only have this much to give. So process that and then carry that into the meetings. Like, it's you and I getting together, Whitney, and I'm like, hey, Whitney, I'm so glad I have a chance to meet with you. Just so you know, I have an hour here. I'm a hard stop at, 12:30 and process. And when you say that going into those times, when you've already decided what the space is and then you're able to leave it, that helps those transitions a ton. But that is just time then. That's not emotions. That's not any of those things, those other.
Right. But that then requires more processing afterwards and say, what do I have now to give into this? It took an hour of time. What else did it take? I think there's a lot of processing that happens. And maybe if it's in an unhealthy relationship, it's with other people that you are in a healthy relationship with, that know your heart, that are willing to speak the truth to you too. If it's like, this is when you just have to bear with, like walking in love. I think going back to 2 John, and John had walking with love and walking in love and walking in truth. And I processed with Christina for quite a while on what does walking in love look like? And we went to scripture, and bearing with is one of those things that, it's a refrain. When you look at scripture that talks about love, like, what does biblical love look like?
Do you know how that word's translated in the King James?
No.
Long suffering.
So, okay.
Long suffering.
Right?
Boundaries.
But also, like,
Yeah.
sometimes it feels like suffering, sometimes it feels like it for a long time, depending on who you're interacting with. So boundaries are important, but also a long game, I think. With people are a long game. It's not like done, in and out.
Yep. And that's why it's so important to have those fills too, places where you are getting poured into, healthy relationships. The other thing that popped into my mind with an unhealthy relationship is that if in processing with others, it becomes apparent that it's time to end an unhealthy relationship.
There's necessary endings too, yeah.
There are endings,
Yeah.
and you should never assume that an unhealthy person is going to respond to your boundaries in a healthy way. You kind of just have to prepare. This is going to be an unhealthy response from this person. They are going to put things on me that weights
Sure.
that I don't deserve to carry. I'm going to need to process this afterwards. But unhealthy people don't respond well to boundaries because they're unhealthy. And that's one of the reasons boundaries are needed, but that also makes it complicated. But that's one of those coming back to processing your limits and your responsibilities and all of those things. Like, it's my responsibility to be wise with my time. I can't choose how you're going to respond to me in that. So those are fun
So
conversations.
if you are someone trying to set up boundaries with an unhealthy person, be sure you have a healthy person that you can process with.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Set up that boundary as well.
That's
Like, hey,
that's really good.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, good. We solved some of those
We didn't
problems.
solve.
We talked about some of
We
those
talked
problems.
about
So
we talked about talking more with people. That's what we talked
and
about.
being in community, being in healthy
Yes,
community,
yes.
which is
Yep.
hard.
Yep.
It's hard to find healthy community. It's hard to be healthy. You got to invest a lot in order to have healthy community, but it's so worthwhile. So cool. Oh, Philemon, bring in there. So yeah, broken things don't work well. Broken relationships don't work well. And so, how do we process this? The value of repairing relationships. It's important to your worship. He started that. That was such a good point. And I thought it's such a good thing to talk about.
You know what I
So,
loved is in the first service. So John's sermon was done. We sang the first song, and then repairing relationships is important to your worship came back up. It was a computer glitch,
Yep.
whatever, misfire, but it stayed up there for a long time in between the first song and the second song. And John leaned over and he's like, "Don't you just think that this fire is like a spirit empowered something where somebody's wrestling right now with their worship, and it's just this call to like this repairing relationships is important for your worship?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, kind of like that."
No snap.
Oh snap! Kind of like that misfire of the
Yeah.
notes going back up on the screen in the middle of the worship set.
Well, hey, if that challenged you, dear listener, let us know at podcast@woodlandchurch.org. I'm honest. I'm honest about that. Like, I'd love to hear how, as a listener, you're processing and leaning in. And if there's an opportunity that Whitney and I would have to kind of walk with you in your processing with Jesus, or Barry too, but we're the regulars here. So
Now you got to find a different email for Barry.
yeah, that's true. You're gonna have to figure that
Good
out.
luck.
So Dave or Whitney at woodlandchurch.org, or you can email us at podcast
And we'll
at
forward you on to
woodlandchurch.org.
Barry.
So yeah, we'll let you know.
Thank
so,
you.
So that's good. Yeah, this was a really broken relationship that was there between Philemon and Onesimus, and definitely appreciated the way that John walked through it. One thing, man, he asked the question in the fix it or not section. He said, how many of you would fix a broken iPhone screen? If your iPhone screen's broken, how many fix an iPhone? It's just, there was this assumption that everyone had an iPhone.
I know. I was like, get rid of it. You don't
Really
need an iPhone.
bothersome. Really bothersome to me as a faithful
That's the point
Android.
you walk
Android's the
away
way to go.
Yeah, that was my main tension I had.
Do
in the
Android
message.
phones screens not break?
Oh no, they break as much as I don't know. My phone, I drop it all the time and it doesn't break, but it's not. I don't know if there's any better than an iPhone screen, but there's just this assumption that everyone had an iPhone. It bothered me. It bothered
Did he
you,
say
Barry?
iPhone?
Yeah,
He did.
multiple
did.
times. Were you first
And it was
service?
a picture. No,
Oh, you were second service.
And the picture was of iPhone.
Yeah.
Okay.
And my first thought was, that iPhone still has a home button. Get rid of it. I was like,
It's yeah. So anyway, that was my takeaway. So Whitney, what takeaways did you have?
I appreciated Jen kind of leaned into Paul appealing and not asking here in this letter. So Paul appealing over and over in different ways. John kind of walked through that. And I just think like the heart of this thing for me was Paul's appeal to the gospel and to Jesus. Like Jesus' mission was reconciliation, reconciling us to God, right? Like I keep going back to that. I think it's somewhere in Corinthians, 2 Corinthians.
Yeah.
Like we've been given this ministry of reconciliation because God was reconciling us to him through Christ. So just how this simple letter it's not simple, it's a short letter, not simple, between Paul to Philemon about Onesimus, including a bunch of other people. There's a lot of people listed in this. Like this is to Philemon, but it's also to Apphia and who else? Archippus.
Another.
Like that's a whole
8.
house church leadership team in there that he's talking to. This is important to you, Philemon, but it's also important to your whole house church to understand this thing, because this is the heart of the gospel.
Mhm.
It's reconciliation. So that was like, this is a gospel letter, and it may not be this like hit you up in the face. You just kind of got to sit in it for a while and recognize God's heart is to reconcile humanity to himself and humanity to each other. But then I got to, what's the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation?
I think forgiveness speaks. So if we're in conflict, let's say it's my fault. I think it's your responsibility to forgive. It's my responsibility to be apologetic. And the restoration of that relationship is reconciliation.
And it's not on you for me to forget. Like
Nope.
it can be forgiveness can be a one-way street.
It's not on
It's
you.
my heart.
Yep, it's
that
your
needs forgiveness.
And it's my heart that's
It's not two players.
that's apologetic. Yeah.
Right.
So I can be apologetic
you're
without
not,
receiving
though.
forgiveness, and you can be forgiving without receiving apology.
Yes.
But it takes both to
Reconciling.
reconcile.
Yeah.
So,
So that's what this is getting at, right? Like, I think we could wade into waters where there's not two parties ready to reconcile.
Right.
That's not what we're talking about here. This is talking about reconciling a relationship that's between two parties willing to step in.
well, I think for Paul, it was Onesimus is apologetic. Philemon, you need to be forgiving in
Forgiveness
order
is-
to reconcile.
Yeah. So forgiveness is almost a precursor to reconciliation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You can't have relational reconciliation without
forgiveness.
forgiveness.
But you can have forgiveness without reconciliation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And that's that follow-up. I mean, I thought John did a good job in saying there are relationships this side of heaven that will not be reconciled because the hurt or brokenness or sinfulness is that deep. But that doesn't preclude us from seeking forgiveness. I don't think that there should be a Christian relationship that is impossible to be reconciled. I think in Christ, every relationship in the church, it should
Has
be
the
reconciled.
ability.
Yeah. That doesn't mean that both people just claim they're Christians. That means both people are Christians, are Christ followers. But there are going to be broken relationships between us and the church and those outside of the church, that it is still our responsibility to either be apologetic if we were wrong or to forgive if we were wronged. But there might not be reconciliation because the other part isn't going to happen because there's no gospel impetus for those folks outside of the church.
And that's not to say every broken relationship between a Christian and a non-Christian cannot come to reconciliation, because that you could also see that happen. Were you going to say something? No.
The thing that stood out to me in this was the accountability portion. I was like, yes, like we've all heard this before, but I was like, oh, do I want to be held accountable or do I want to hold someone accountable? I think there's a lot more relationships I would try to mend if someone were to hold me accountable for.
Because the other part of this is you have a Paul interceding between the broken relationship party, right? Like Paul's not the one that has a broken relationship. He has a good relationship with both parties, but it's
and
Philemon and Onesimus.
Paul knew that they both are ready to be reconciled.
Yeah.
So he was like, all right, I'm going to be there.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to hear the story about how you guys...
You're going to do more than I even asked you to, Philemon. Yeah.
And that was the challenge then that he placed on us as well. It was, what relationships are you, Paul? And you're not neither Philemon nor Onesimus, but you're Paul. And so how are you going to help that? So those are tricky. Brokering the relationship in order that it can be repaired was a phrase that John used.
Say that again slowly.
Paul is brokering the relationship in order that it can be repaired. So he's acting as that in between. Yeah. That's really good. I think that keeping short accounts in terms of our apologies and in terms of our forgiveness is so important. And then, allowing that to fuel reconciliation within the church. It breaks my heart when I hear of people who aren't willing to come to church because of a broken relationship. And how those get navigated is really, really tricky.
I think too that, like, even to cycle back to how John opened, I think he opened it this way. might be making this up. We talked about broken things that
Yep.
don't work right.
Yep.
But also like how often you don't quite fix it.
Mhm.
Like if there's a flat tire on my lawnmower that I just inflate enough to get the lawn done, and then I come back a week later when you have to mow the lawn again, and it's like this thing again that you have to continue. If you don't fix it, if you don't fully fix the thing, if you just put a Band-Aid on it, then it's going to act up again. It's not going to work right fully. So there's that piece too of like identifying what is broken relationships, and sometimes we just have figured out how to function in them,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and we don't even recognize that they're broken. They're just like, you just get an icky feeling when you come to church, or you just get an icky something, or I don't go down that hallway so I can avoid that person, whatever it is, right? Like those are very simple examples. There's bigger ones. But it's paying attention to how broken relationships have affected you and how
Mhm.
I am responding to those to avoid fixing or to avoid reconciliation.
And the longer you take to fix it,
Mm-hmm.
the worse it gets.
Mm-hmm.
The more it takes to fix it, or even to repair it enough to
Mm-hmm.
use it. I'm thinking of the lawnmower wheel,
Mm-hmm.
right? You keep airing it up every week. Eventually, it might
The whole thing's
you
gonna
might have to
blow.
air it up twice
Yeah.
to mow your lawn
Yeah.
once.
Bring the
And it
compressor
might
out
cost
there
more to
halfway.
fix it.
It might cost more to
Right.
fix it, and then in the end, you may not fix it. You may throw it away and get a new one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then what? It's
Mhm.
like
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's in the beginning. It might just be a patch,
I
which
still
is
have
really
your
quick and
lawnmower
easy.
in my garage with a
Yeah.
flat tire. So
Yeah.
let me know when you want to come fix it.
So, well, it's a lot more than a flat tire. That one. That's the one I started with a screwdriver. Right? So that was a messy. But yeah, at some point, then you've inflated it so many times, you have to replace the tire, and the cost is going up.
But even that statement of there's a lot more wrong with it, I think sometimes it's hard to identify what needs to be fixed here too. Going back to even unhealthy relationships and what that looks like and how you walk in them. Like, okay, so going to Thanksgiving with your family makes you nervous. Why does it make you nervous? Is there something broken there? And what's broken there? And with who? And how do you go about fixing that? That takes a lot of discernment, a lot of wisdom, a lot of sitting before God and listening to His Spirit. Talk to you, being humble enough for you to be able to walk into that, but then brave enough to speak truth. Woo!
Yeah. So this Onesimus and Philemon is a situation where there was clearly something that went wrong,
Yeah.
right? Like
Right.
Onesimus stole,
Yeah.
also ran away in that
Yeah.
culture, all of that stuff. But maybe Philemon was a bad master at the time. Who knows how that all panned out? But there are so many relationships. I think the harder ones to repair are ones where it's just been a long, slow grate.
Yeah.
Someone hasn't done anything explicitly wrong.
Yeah.
It's just like, I just don't like being around you. And I'm bitter about that. Or,
Yeah.
or the ones where you have wronged someone and you don't know it.
Mhm.
Yep.
Or you've been
Mhm.
wronged and you know that person doesn't know it. And it's not so
Mhm.
much of saying, hey, we need to repair this relationship. It's our relationship is broken. What?
Mhm.
Yeah, let's talk about this. Those are hard.
Mhm.
Because even as I was going through it, I'm like, I don't
Hmm.
know of any relationships in the church that I feel like I need to repair. And then at the same time, I think I'm saying that, and some people might be listening, and they're like, yeah, you need to know about this one, Dave.
Mhm.
Because I think, in the way that I do work, in the way that I think that I might have wronged people and not known it.
Mhm.
And so I don't like that feeling.
But there's a
So,
call to humility there for you then to be able to hear that. There might be, if somebody knows of something, the ability to be a Paul and say, Dave, you need to know about this one.
Yeah.
Right?
yeah, not in a
Or-
gossipy way, but in a
No.
let's
Let's-
broker this relationship for
Yeah.
the sake of reconciliation.
And for the sake of the gospel, like this is the God reconciling us to Him and us to each other is how we look like the church. It's how we look
Yes.
different than other places and other spaces. And so, yeah, I think that's what the heartbeat of this letter for me is so gospel based. It's so much of like, we do this because we're different, because we are in relationship with Christ, because of what Christ has done on our behalf. We get to do it with first our hearts before God and then our hearts between each other.
It's heavy stuff. So
It is heavy stuff. It's hard stuff.
It's gospel stuff, though.
It's gospel stuff.
It's so fueled by how Christ loved us. Long suffering is so fueled by how God loves us. Because we look and we're like, God, why don't you just fix it? Well, he could. He chooses not to. He suffers more than we suffer in the brokenness of this world. And he long suffers for the sake of those who will come to know him. And he exemplifies that in a way that's so much more profound than what we experience. And so why can we not, in the image of God, do the same? So with that, let's
that heavy note.
Yeah. So let's transition. I'm really excited about the random question today. So Whitney's going to get to answer that. Is it? Oh, is it me?
Switched at the very last.
It's like on the line here.
Yes.
So, okay.
Excellent.
Well, I don't know what the
excited
answer
about
to this. Yeah, you can have an unlimited supply of one thing for the rest of your life. What is it? And the two suggestions that this gave was sushi or Scotch tape.
Sushi.
Yeah, I don't think sushi's a bad
No.
answer here. So you have an unlimited supply of one thing. Oh man. Can it be something like
Relationships.
no, I don't want that.
Dave's like, I like my limit.
Yeah.
I like that to be limited.
I've worked on a very narrow segment of that and quite content. Thank you very much. I wonder if it'd be something like storylines.
Oh, you want to just write forever?
No,
Just
not
want to
like not
explore
like,
them?
Yeah, like new story, even. I'm in a season, and I'm really enjoying it, but I'm in a season where I'm not watching much TV at all.
Yeah.
Like at all. And that's good, but it's also because I don't feel like there's anything I really want to watch.
Anything new.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I'm like, I kind of miss the excitement of the next episode and things like that. And so
Are we just getting old?
So,
Is this what it feels
I
like
think
to
that's
get
what's
old?
partially happening. So I think that, shoot. Youth is that. I will have an unlimited supply of that one day. So,
I would choose pig feed.
unlimited supply of pig feed. You are getting old, Whitney. That is the oldest answer I think anyone could have ever given.
Yeah.
So some people would say ice cream, some,
What happens when the
Pig
pigs
feed.
run out?
Well, that's the idea is if I have pig feed, I can feed my pigs and they'll just keep producing
Yeah.
pork,
Okay.
which then is delicious and
So you could
wonderful.
have just said pork, but you chose the work
The
route.
feed is needed for the pigs.
I enjoy feeding the pigs.
So,
I just don't enjoy having to order it and go pick it up and then refill all the things. So if like where
it'd
I
be
get
like a magical chest freeze. As
Yeah.
you open up, there's always pork.
no, I like
Pork
that. I
loin,
like
pork steak, pork.
and I really enjoy the rhythm of morning and evening chores. There's something
Okay.
that the only time I don't enjoy it is when we have to leave and find somebody to do it. And I don't like putting our chores on other people. That's the worst
So,
part of farming. But I love the 85% time rhythm of having something to do in the morning and the evening to get outside.
so part of your answer was if you could have an unlimited supply of chores. that was part of your answer was chores. It's just more food for the chores. So that speaks to a healthy rhythm, though. That speaks to our age. So
it speaks to our age.
a stage of life, maybe.
Mhm.
More mature stage of life.
That's a hard question to answer.
I picked TV shows. Whitney picked chores. Oh, man.
I chose pig feed, Dave. Makes my chores easier.
Barry, what do you think? An unlimited supply of what?
Gasoline.
Resources.
Resources.
Fix the pig. Money. Barry says money.
Not just money, even time. Like to
Mhm.
be able to do the things that you love without boundaries, honestly.
Mm.
Without to be able to do things that fill you.
Mhm.
That sounds selfish. But
No, it goes back a little bit to something Justin said, I think in passing on stage.
feeding pigs feeds Whitney.
Yeah.
Unlimited storylines feeds you.
That's something like
That's
that. But Justin talked about self-control as the Spirit giving us the ability to do what we want to do.
Mhm.
And ultimately our want should be being conformed increasingly into God's wants.
Right. That want is aligned with
With
will,
God,
right?
yeah. But self-control is the ability and the freedom to do what we want to do. And a privation of resources limits our ability to do that. But also privation of self-control limits, spending an hour watching reels on your phone, that's limiting. That's a lack of self-control that's limiting your ability to do what you want to do. So resources. I'm going to say that's too broad. I need you to narrow it down for next time you're on, but that's okay. So nobody picks Scotch tape. So
my second one was going to be firewood.
Firewood. Try firewood.
Try firewood. I like making it, but it just doesn't. We don't ever do it in the timely manner, so we never have tried firewood.
Yeah. So sushi's
unlimited amount of fuel would be nice.
Fuel, right?
Like energy.
Yeah. I'm just like road tripping. We don't need to stop for fuel. We're just gonna stop for oil change and food and other things, but just
what kind of an oil? If you have a long trip, I just stop for an oil change.
I mean, I have to stop for fuel, but
so all right. Well, hey, this has been Cabin Conversations. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back next week, Lord willing.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.